I said that morning coffee, even though it's not morning. I'm currently recording this at 9:37 at night. Anyway, guys, got good news, got bad news. All right, let's start with the good news first because, well, since this is America, there's a shit ton of bad news. So as we talked about on the last show, we've got the stimulus package being passed officially. The only thing that's left is for 45 to sign it into law. Basically, guys, if you are single and you make under 75,000, or you're filing as a couple, married or otherwise, you guys make under 150,000, you're going to get $1,200 per person. And if you guys have kids, you'll get $500 per child. These payments are going to be issued through direct deposit. So if you filed a tax return last year and you got your refund via direct deposit, this is how those monies are going to be sent and deposited into your account. If you don't have an account on file or you didn't file taxes, then they're going to send you out a check. The payments are supposed to be being issued within 3 weeks of the date of signing. So I'm assuming that's either going to be today or Monday, depending on whenever Trump gets to, doing work. Also, a really cool thing is that there will be $350 billion made available to small businesses as long as they do not fire or lay off their employees. So if you're taking this money as a small business, you really need to make sure that you have your employees fully staffed. Another cool thing is, like I said earlier in the last podcast, unemployment benefits are going to be going up by $600 weekly. And I believe that's going to be for an extended period. The only bad thing I can think of is, or I can see from reading this news, is going to be, of course, the speed of the payments at which they come. If you don't have a direct deposit and you got to get a check, you guys know how long that's going to take. And it's not saying whether the payments are going to be tax-free or not. I'm hoping they would be because it's the Fed, but again, America. All right, so bad news. America has officially surpassed Italy with the most cases of coronavirus in the world, over 100,000, and over 1,200 people have died so far. Really bad. And in a really weird and just despicable opportunistic case, there have been measures put into place for Mississippi, Texas, and Ohio to ban or stop abortions being had during the COVID-19 pandemic. The logic here that the GOP, because it's the fucking Republicans, are using is that those doctors and resources should be made available to the COVID pandemic because, I don't know, abortion is an elective procedure. I don't know, it's really, really mind-blowing. Really, really mind-blowing how this country works sometimes. And to continue the fucked up news, the GOP is attempting to pass a new voter restriction ID rule in Kentucky. This measure, if it passes, could possibly go into effect in the summer, which we all know is going to affect the presidential election as well as pretty much everything else. But yeah, and all this shit seems really bleak, like the world is actually fucking ending. But nah, fam, we ain't dead yet. This is Quarantine Talks.
Should be self-quarantined.
Quarantined in their
Quarantine in place.
Quarantine for the guards. Quarantine.
All right, so guys, this episode, I really just wanted to take time out to really delve deeply into the complexity and shockingness of the entire world being closed, right? Like, the world is closed. Like, I never thought that I would be able to say that and mean it, but the world is fucking closed, bro. Literally, international freedom of movement is pretty much restricted, and I'm pretty certain if the shit keeps getting worse, domestic freedom of movement is going to be restricted. And it's just really one of those things, like, this is very fucking weird to be living through. All right, I am an 80s baby. I am peak millennial right now. And it's like, we have lived through crack. We have lived through Hurricane Katrina. We have lived through like 9/11. Fucking like 3 wars or some shit like that, and now a global pandemic, all before the age of 35. I saw a meme that was like, we've been through all this shit, millennials are fucking tired. We're a little ragged looking baby, like that baby looks stressed, and that's how we all are, bro. Like, I'm tired, man. Like, I just, like, at what point does the world like go good? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, at what point do we start winning? Like, because I'm confused. Like, I'm really, really confused. Terribly confused. And it's like, we have millennial woes. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the millennial shit of, okay, retirement is a joke. It's not a thing that will ever be attainable by us, barring us becoming like millionaires or billionaires. And to be perfectly honest, the majority of us will not do that. I mean, that's just not something that's not the way that this country is set up. That's not really like the way that the world is set up, you know? Just the really common things that as Americans we would define as like middle class, like owning a home and shit. As a fucking millennial, like, that shit is not, I mean, it's feasible, but the cost of living where we are now is not what it was when our parents were coming up, when our great-grandparents were coming up, when our grandparents were coming up. Like, shit was actually affordable then. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, shit ain't affordable now. Like, you really got to be putting up numbers. And then, like, being black on top of that, and being birthed in this country and having roots in this country, we have like a ton of other shit heaped on top of us, on top of the other millennial shit. I mean, I guess the one good thing that's come out of it is definitely, I think more black people are definitely more entrepreneurs. On a micro scale, I'm going to say that we have more wealth. Like, we have black billionaires, we have black millionaires. But on a macro scale, our finances are fucked. The trend is something like black folk own 10 cents on the dollar to what white folk own, right? The liquidity of our assets by the time we reach like something like 2050 is going to be net zero. And like, this isn't just for like one black person. This is for like the entirety of the black American population. And it's like, there have been systemic things that have been done to us to put us in this burden. It's not necessarily like it's all black people's fault. And that's the thing that, yes, spoiler alert, white listeners, this is going to be the episode where I talk about the fucked up shit that white people have done. So if you don't want to hear about it, you can turn it off now. But it's just always one of those things where it's like, the onus is always on black people to take responsibility for their actions, but it's never really like the original sin of, hey, if white people didn't bring us here, then there would be no responsibility to be taking. Slavery propped up an entire continent, essentially, and then propped up a country, essentially, and then established a new form of governance and financial system. This is what a few million black folk did for this side of the hemisphere, right? Not to mention all of the gains that are or were and can be attributed to slavery globally. Slavery wasn't just something that America benefited and profited on. Slavery was something that the entire world benefited and profited on. I had to say that correctly. And it's like, when we think about that, like specifically just going on the micro level of America before the macro layer of the world, we got housing segregation. Like, up until about 1968, it was federally accepted and legal to deny a black person housing based on them being black. So, you know, when we look at that, in America, you got your money, you accrued your wealth from land and house ownership. Like, that's how things worked. You got a piece of land, you farmed it, you tilled it, you built the house, you sold that land and house for more money, you bought another house, you bought bigger land, and you were able to get and accrue more assets. And then you were able to pass that down from family member to family member and leave wealth. That's how generational wealth was built. It was literally built over generations. And so when we think about black people being shut out of that for the majority of our existence in this country, and then home ownership being the cornerstone of American wealth, all of this shit makes sense. Like, how's black people supposed to make money? Here's another interesting fact that I know people didn't know. After Lincoln freed the slaves, he established the Freedmen's Bank, right? It was literally a bank established for freed Africans on American soil that was specifically for us. Like, so black people put into this bank the equivalent of what is now $1 billion. And do you know what happened with all of that money? It was liquidated during the Great Depression to be given out as loans to the entirety of America, with the exclusion of black people, right? So I always like to come back to that because it's just such an interesting fact. During a time of economic hardship for all, the money that black people had, because it was something like 60 to 75% of black people in this country put their money in that bank, right? So the lion's share of free black Americans put their money, their savings, their loans, all of these things were tied up into that bank. And then for the government to come in, take that money, reappropriate that money, give it to white families, and not disperse it back to the black people that owned it, it's just like the story of America, right? And it's just always funny when people think, or when people say shit like, oh, well, why don't black people have money? Bitch, because y'all always take it. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's not talk about Black Wall Street. Let's not talk about all of the Black Wall Streets, pretty much all across America, all of these affluent, rich, bustling black towns, black businesses that were systematically gutted, bombed, actual planes dropped actual bombs on actual American citizens, right? Let me repeat that. American citizens flew actual planes and then dropped actual bombs on other American citizens that lived 5 to 10 miles away from them in their same city. See Tulsa Massacre. Actual Americans went into actual towns and actually burned down, shot, killed, maimed, robbed, and stole from, yet again, from other Americans in many, many different towns. Just Google, look up Black Wall Streets in America and see what happened to basically all of them over and over again. Poor white people looked at doing well for themselves, black people, and decided like, hey, we want that. They shouldn't have that because they're dumb, they're stupid, they're niggers. How dare they live better than us? And they went in and they burnt it down and they took what they wanted, and then you cover it up in history so that nobody knows, right? And we act like this didn't happen. We act like none of this happened. This is all fairy tales and that black people are crazy. Like, you know, black people invented racism as this thing that we fall back on as a crutch when times get hard. That's what white America would have you believe. This is something that we're making up for the fun of it. I could literally go on a fact-based basis on all of the fucked up shit that has happened in between black folk and white folk in this country, you know? When I think about the American, like, dream, and I think about the, like, how much of a farcity it actually is, like, it's laughable to me. And I only come to terms with it really when I talk to like my international friends. Like, you guys are going to hear some of those episodes coming up. They're really good, by the way. But it's like I'm left with this thought and this idea. When America gets a cold, black people get the flu, right? Irony intended, pun intended, because this pandemic is going to affect black people, lower income people really, really hard. So fuck all this bullshit about black people can't get COVID-19. We do. We can. It's been proven. All right. That is a myth that needs to be taken down and dismantled. Because the last time that happened was during, I want to say, yellow fever. There was a doctor who came aboard a slave ship during the yellow fever outbreak. And that doctor noticed that none of the slaves had it, but all the white people did. So he postulated that black people were immune. So there was a yellow fever outbreak in Philadelphia, I do believe, and this notion by this doctor became, or this idea by this doctor became medical fact and medical doctrine. And it was told to black people that they would be okay and that they should be trained to be nurses and to be aides during this pandemic. Okay, this was, of course, a false narrative. And during the yellow fever outbreak in Philadelphia, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of black people that actually died based on false information. So this is the danger in spreading or even saying things in jest like black people don't get the coronavirus. Bruh, yes, we do. This particular version or strain of the coronavirus is called COVID-19. But the coronavirus as a whole is a specific type of genome of virus. There are black people all the time that either contract the flu or die from the flu. So that is a dangerous narrative, even in jest, to propagate. Really briefly, speaking about how this pandemic is going to affect black people way harder than it's going to affect the rest of the country is because that the gig economy is something that has flourished under A, millennials, and B, definitely come to like super fruition with black millennials, right? A gig economy is something like a sex worker, a barber, a Lyft driver, I don't know, your two-bit hustler slanging DVDs in a barbershop. These are all things that we would consider gigs. It's a gig job. It's nothing that is quote-unquote definite, and it's definitely a lot of times nothing that you have to pay taxes on, or it is something that is hard to be tracked by the government as far as how much money you actually make. That is what technically, gig economies are. And so black people as a whole, that's how we make our money. Black people are barbers. We got the black hair salons. I live in Atlanta. We got strip clubs. We got promoters at clubs. There is a whole system of gig economy and small business that are based on and are symbiotic to each other. Speaking from personal experience, like my digital marketing person that I was hiring, shout out Bree, I actually had to let her go because of my current work schedule. She has a small business firm where she does digital marketing and strategization. That's a small business that's tied to a gig, which would be social influencing or social media influencing, so on and so forth. This pandemic is affecting me, which in turn affects the amount of money that I have, which in turn affects the amount of money that she is going to make. You understand what I'm saying? It's just specifically like lethal to us. We all know like the city of Atlanta is black as fuck. You know what I'm saying? It's the Wakanda of America, and there's a majority of African Americans that come here, that live and work here. Like there is an entire economy built off black millennial entrepreneurship and gig working. I used to be a club promoter, bro. The club has been closed for going on 2 to 3 weeks. Do you understand what 2 to 3 weekends is to a club promoter with no money? Like, my God, that's rent, that's car note. If you got kids, that's diapers, that's Pampers. It's like that is something that is particularly sensitive to me and that I can relate to and that I feel for those people. Like, the system of gig working and black business that is built upon the barter system, essentially, because it's what it is. It's offering a good or a service for cash, right? This way that Africans in America have found a way to blend African culturalism with European business ideals. It's very interesting because when people say that, black people don't know how to do business or we do business wrong or, whatever, so on and so forth, it's like, well, we were never meant to have to deal in this system because our systems of business was not fiat based. It was based on actual work ethic. It was based on actual tangible goods. Like you build my house, I'll give you 10 cattle. You look after my kids, I'll give you a pound of rice. And regardless of, however long we really think, like black people have only really been in America for 400 or 500 years, So that's when we think about African history, ideals, practices. True, it's been affected greatly by colonialism. 400 to 500 years, it's about 10 generations removed from our ancestors. So those things are going to be deeply embedded in all of us because even when we got here, we still kept up and practiced a lot of the things that we took with us from the continent. So I always really push back on this idea that black people don't know business. No, black people know business. We know business. We know how to do things. We just don't necessarily know or understand European business models, or we're not as good with them because A, it's not our shit, and B, we were locked out of it for so long. We have to, it's like learning new things. Our core values, our core African traditions and values are completely opposite of European business models. If you judge a fish on its ability to fly, it's always going to be a loser. It's always going to be a failure. You understand what I'm saying? You know, will that fish be able to fly? Possibly, but I mean, there's going to be a learning curve, bro. Like, there's going to be time for that fish to take its gills and repurpose it to become wings, you know? Another thing that I always like to point out is that people are like, yo, black folk in America are like crabs in a barrel. The barrel is not the crab's natural habitat, all right? If you put crabs in a barrel, they're going to climb over each other trying to get out. And I just really want to make sure that the entirety of the situation is evaluated. It is put into context, and it is looked at in its entirety, right? It's evaluated as a whole thing. Within the past, 30 years, this is the first time that we're seeing black people be able to take control of our narrative and be able to talk about the things that affects us. And that's powerful and it's profound. But I'm gonna bring this into closing because it's ran a little long. And I'm just gonna say that I was listening to T.I.'s podcast expeditiously. It's kind of funny. Like, I like Tip. He reminds me of my uncle. It's really country, knows big words. Damn good businessman. He feels that the reason why black people in America are not respected is because there is no nation, no ethnicity, no color of people that gain their independence and their freedom without bloodshed. And I thought that was profoundly powerful because I can honestly say that is something different. That is something that I hadn't actually conceptualized and realized it to be true. We're the first ones to ever do that. And I'm not advocating for violence by no means, but I think there's power in the fact that in the past 100 years in this country, we've gone from segregation and Jim Crow and all of these horrible things to putting a black man in the White House and a black man being president. If I was a white supremacist, I would be bothered as well because there's power in black people and we have the sole ability. I've never seen this happen with anybody else on the face of the planet, but we have the sole ability, black Americans, to actually change the narrative of the entire world when we concentrate our force, our thought, our intents into one thing. The only other people that I can say personally that have done that was the Europeans, right? And the Europeans did it by force, but black people do it with soft power. We do it with influence. We do it with swag. We do it with style. We do it with finesse. Our powers and abilities are so very unique to us and the culture here, specifically tied to this continent, this soil, this place. And I'm recording this podcast right now. This pandemic is going to put a lot of shit in perspective for a lot of fucking people. And it's going to really, really, really have a lot of people looking at things different. And the one thing that I can honestly say black Americans do best is create. And if it's one thing that this quarantine is doing, is giving all of us in America, but especially black people, the ability to create. And so I really want us to take this time to concentrate our energies and our focus into doing better, because we can do better, we must do better, and to grasping our narrative. So once again, I'm going to say, I know shit is bleak, and I know this shit is rough, but nah, fam, hang in there, because we ain't dead yet, bro. Quarantine Talks is written, produced, and edited by me, Jay Carrington, with original music composed by Brian Haddon. Today's artwork is brought to you guys by Andy Dean Photography. He's on Shutterstock, the site shutterstock.com. The Michelangelo statue of David with the surgical mask on, I thought was insanely clever and hilarious, and I had to use it. It's all right, guys. Just remember, stay sane, stay safe, and stay creative. Peace.